And we're live with the Inside the War Room podcast. Not normally how we do this one, but I sent the link out live, and so here we are. Today's guest is a gentleman I have on just south of me, southish, from Austin, Texas, Chase Geiser, who is at Real Chase Geiser on Twitter. We'll link to that, and also the host of the One American podcast, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so tell me about the show. I've kind of watched some of your stuff, and I've seen. I think you've had on some kind of more libertarian guests, which is kind of where I fall at. And so, what's the show? What's the genesis for the show? And what got you into podcasting?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, actually started the podcast in May of 2021, so just about 2 months ago, and it sort of came naturally out of just a general sense of frustration as a Republican with what Republican leaders are doing, and as and how the party leadership as a whole is doing. And so this is like a small way for me to sort of try to take matters into my own hands and see what I can do to change the way that conservatism and liberty are branded and the way that it's perceived, and try to reawaken an appreciation for Americanism. And basically all I do on the podcast is reach out to various influencers from all sorts of different backgrounds who have a general respect and admiration for America and what it means to be American. And, even though not all my guests would agree on the specifics and the details of policy or politics necessarily, there's still that sort of appreciation for self-actualization and individualism and bootstrapping and that sort of culture that I think that is sort of being attacked and shamed by the left. And so that's what we do.
Yeah, so it's interesting because if you go back prior to the Trump era, so I used to be I think in Texas I'm an independent. I don't know if I'm registered as a libertarian or not. I'm a member of the LP, but I'm not sure if I'm registered. But I used to be a Republican many moons ago. And I left the Republican movement because it felt like the Republicans, the conservatives, they really don't have, and I'm not saying this about you, this I want to get into some of, but they don't really have principles. And so I'll give you an example. When you talk about being small government, when the Republicans are in, especially the top media voices and stuff, they really don't criticize the Republicans for how they handle things, how they expand the government. And the conservatives that I'll watch online, they will justify things that are clearly not conservative principles because their person is in office, and Trump seemed to amplify that. I think Trump did some good stuff. I think it's some bad stuff, but I don't know how the Republicans and the conservatives, which is two different things. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. I don't know how they move forward because the conservatives, I don't feel like they really understand what they are. I don't know. They're trying to conserve something, but I'm not sure they know what they're trying to conserve. And the Republicans, that's a horse of a different color.
Right.
What is a Republican, and how you define that? And so I'm curious. That's why I want to get you on. I want to hear your perspective on this stuff. How do you think about it? Because for me, I had to leave the party with the LP. Now there's definitely a spectrum of libertarians, but the Mises Caucus, which is where I'm at, is kind of a little bit more narrow. I would probably be more of one of the big government guys, for the Mises Caucus perspective.
Sure.
But the kind of the range of the ideas are pretty small. So you're kind of arguing in a different platform with conservatism or being a Republican today. It doesn't really feel like there's a lot of grip on what that means. So from your perspective, kind of unpack that for me.
Yeah. So when I think of a Republican, I think of an establishment party hack. And when I think of a conservative, I think of somebody who's trying to conserve the Constitution and the rights that it protects. It's basically as simple as that. And so traditionally conservatives were sort of branded as, those who are kind of morally dogmatic, very sort of almost like evangelical Christian values, hardline sort of dogma, right? Just like, hey, this is how you need to behave, and this is our moral view of the world. And I think the party has moved away from that. Not the party, but I think conservatives have moved away from that because I think that a lot of the evangelical dogmatism, and not to criticize evangelicals, okay, so I have deep respect for Christianity and where in its role, but I think that frankly America is becoming a more secular nation, and You can definitely see that over the course of the past 50 years alone, specifically. And I think that as a result of that, the political leadership has shied away from propping up Christian-specific ideas and tried to make a more secular argument in favor of sort of the same things that Christianity inadvertently supports as well. Things like individual rights, free will, right? These are all sort of Christian values. I mean, if you really look into the root of these ideas in Western culture. And so I don't think that conservatives, I don't think that to say conservatives are morally dogmatic is true anymore. I think that those who are evangelical or Christian based are still voting conservative, voting for Republicans, consider themselves conservatives in large. But I don't think that is the definition or the brand of conservatives. That's not an accurate way to brand conservatism. The left
I lost you there. I don't know if you can hear me or not, but you are gone on my end. Hmm. Okay, well,
the Democrats. Hey, did I lose you for a second?
yeah, you just kind of like spaced out there for like 30 seconds. I don't know. You were.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened. I just kept ranting though, just in case we were live. I'm not sure.
No, yeah, that's fine. So let me pick up where you were before you close. Now, I think you hit on exactly which would be the problem with conservatism is, as someone who's not a conservative anymore, is to your point, it was more of an evangelical movement. Now it's not,
right?
And it's like, right. So what defines conservatism? Like, what are the principles? And so, if you're saying that these are secular arguments that you could make, well, are they? You know, and so I don't think. I think conservatism is always going to struggle as to conserve anything because they're not sure what it is they're supposed to conserve. And so, yeah, I think you're right. That it was evangelical and it's more of a secular movement now. The question is that you would ask, and the same thing could be said to libertarians or anyone is what is the basis for the morals or whatever it is that you're trying to espouse? And so I think that's where conservatism has a hard task in front of it because it's not entirely clear what is the basis for its objections to progressives or to liberals or to Republicans. So
yeah, well, I think that one of the challenges that conservatives face is that if you're brought up in a Christian environment and you have those values and those beliefs and that faith specifically, then it's convenient because a lot of these values, philosophies, ideas, and perspectives are like handed to you on a platter. Like you don't necessarily have to do the same intellectual exercises that Thomas Aquinas had to do, right? Or St. Augustine had to do, or C.S. Lewis had to do in order to logically convince himself of the faith or back the faith up. And so and that's what Nietzsche said was going to happen philosophically. When he said God is dead, he didn't mean that there was a God and God died. He meant that, holy cow, over the next couple of centuries, people are going to stop believing in God the way that they have. And that's going to create a tremendous vacuum because what do you replace God with if you don't believe in God anymore? And we saw in the 20th century, it was the state, right? With communism taking hold, the Third Reich took hold in a big way. When God died, culturally, when faith in God died, right? When people stopped believing in Santa Claus, so to speak, then the sleigh wouldn't fly anymore, right? And I'm not an atheist, so I'm not saying this as like a criticism of those who are religious. I'm just saying as an observation of society, and so that's why it's one of the inconveniences of the conservatives in that so much of their support was leaning on the Christian faith, and that their constituents would still hold that faith in a serious way. And when that starts to be shaken, then it's like, wow, like, not very many people have actually read John Locke's Second Treatise of Government, which explains the logic behind private property rights. Like, not very many people have actually thought through the philosophy and the logic for how we look at nature and interpret the morals based on what we see in the universe around us. Like, there are whole philosophical studies based on this, and it's boring for a lot of people, but not a lot of people study it anymore. So the conservatives, I think, are in this sort of vacuum right now where we have like this intuition that we of what's right and what's wrong, but we no longer have like a satisfying argument for why we believe it.
So, what was your? I don't know what your stance is on Trump in general, but what was your stance on Trump? And then what was the appeal to conservatives to Trump?
Yeah. So I do not agree with Trump on, I would probably say, over half of the things that he said or did, but I enthusiastically voted for him because he was the only candidate who was a populist, and I want a populist leader of America. He was the only one that was just unashamed of what America was. And America, I believe in the whole America First thing, because I think if you're paying taxes to a government, then they should put your interests first. And obviously we haven't been seeing that play out. But I think, whether or not Trump actually executed on that, there's certainly room for debate, but he at least espoused it. And that's why I supported him. So I think he was a populist, and I think the reason that conservatives voted for him wasn't because he was a conservative, because, he was really a rhino. He's a Republican in name only. He's something else. He's not a Democrat or a Republican. He's something else. Probably just a populist, frankly. But I think the reason that conservatives voted for him is because he was the only damn patriot running for office.
Well, so I wrote a piece last year talking about the concerns of populism. So populism, on some level, I think, can do it's very good to put the establishment on notice that the people are frustrated, right? So a populist leader comes up and it's like, why is anyone voting for this person? And the establishment's like, oh, okay, something's changed here. And so Trump did that, and you can see that around the world. So I think it's good for that. The fear of populism is that because it is your guy or our guy, then you almost give that person even more rope or latitude on the mistakes they make, because they, quote, are our guy. And that, to me, is the other side of the danger. And so when you look at some of the stuff that Trump did, so like take like China or the EU, I think a lot of things he pointed out about China and the EU were pretty good, pretty spot on, pretty accurate. Fair critiques to make about us paying for NATO and then wanting to buy the gas from the from the Russians. There's plenty of things he said that they're right. His solutions, I wasn't always in favor of. And that's, to me, where it seems like the Trump supporters, by and large, because he was kind of this America First guy, he was one of the few candidates that's very much proud to be an American type. It kind of gave him a pass almost, and that's the slippery slope of the populist movement is that, well, it is our guy, so therefore we got to give him a little bit more rope than normal.
Yeah, and I think that what we saw with Trump goes to show or highlights another issue that we have politically, because, and this is an oversimplification, but it's close enough that it makes sense. I often say that the Democrats win the emotional debate and the Republicans win the logical debate. Though Republicans, seem to be giving up on the logical debate recently too. So it's not perfect, but it's, in terms of small government, pro-capitalist, those types of basic staples in the Republican Party, seem there's a lot of, Milton Friedman can kick, any communist ass in an economics argument. Okay. So like, it's just not even a question about whether or not capitalism is better or worse for poor people than any other system that currently exists or has existed. Like, obviously it is. But I think that with Trump, we saw somebody that came in and it was all brand. Like, the buy-in was so emotional for him that people dismissed the things that he did that didn't logically make sense. Like, for example, he spent a ton of money a lot of money, and everything he did was with executive order, right?
Mhm.
And now Republicans are all hacked off at all the executive orders that Biden's citing and all the money he's trying to spend. It's like,
Right.
yo, like what's going on? And he was too scared during an election cycle to say, listen, we're not going to do mask mandates, and he can't lock down businesses. Like he was too chicken to do it because he didn't want to be accused of having blood on his hands when people died of COVID, right? And so, but there's basic principles of like liberty that the Republican Party is supposed to fight for, and so I think people gave him a pass for sure. They shouldn't have.
The last year, it's so funny, and this goes to just partisan politics. Trump is the one that all of that happened under. And so you have gasoline prices that are rising now, and a lot of that doesn't necessarily have to do much with Biden. And the Republicans are blaming Biden.
He did shut down the pipeline, though.
Well, sure, but we can spend another time on that. I've got plenty of shows.
So I didn't mean to interrupt you. I didn't mean.
No,
Go ahead.
But I mean, there's we can talk about that another time. But under Trump, all this happened. Trump's the one who authorized it. And I was talking to someone earlier this week, and Trump's problem, he was afraid. Another thing was, if you go back and listen to some of the stuff he said, he would send stuff to the states, and he would be like, well, we're kind of let the states make up their own mind. Of course, there's federal guidelines that were coming out. But then he would want credit. He was the king of the ventilators. He was this, he was that. And he just craved the applause, the recognition that he couldn't just step back and say, okay, New York, call me if you need me, do your own thing. He couldn't do that.
Right.
If he would have done that, the media was never fair to him, so they still would have been unfair. But it'd been a lot easier for him to say, guys, I let all the states make up their own mind. You make up your own mind, and we'll give you whatever you need to help, to help you along your way. But he was so desperate for the attention and for the applause. And then when you listen to, like the Woodward tapes or stuff, it's like, God, man, just a little advice. If you just take a little advice, you probably would have He beat the worst candidate for president in the history of candidates in Hillary Clinton, and he lost to the second worst. So
she's so hot, though.
But I mean, he lost to Biden. How do you do that?
Yeah. I don't think that anybody voted for Biden. I think that they voted against Trump. So I think that it was out of hate.
Sure. But that says a lot about the COVID year. I think a lot of people on the right really diminished how poorly he handled that. And when all of his stuff, his antics on Twitter pre-COVID, some of them are funny, some of them are over crossing the line. Some of it's like, okay, he's dunking on the media. Someone's like, just shut up. It's kind of back and forth. But in the crisis, people don't want that. They want someone who's serious, who's consistent, they can count on, and he just can't play that role. And that's where he can't do it consistently for a long period of time. And so it's like one day he pops up at a hospital with a mask on. It's like, wait, did you change your mind on mask all of a sudden? Are you a mask guy now? Because like you've never been a mask guy. And so, and I think it just unraveled on him so quickly. But to the point I was trying to get at before, it was under his administration we got non-essential businesses, whatever that means. It was under his administration you couldn't go to church, you couldn't go to to the synagogue, you couldn't go to Walmart. All those things happened under the Trump administration. And I remember telling conservatives that I knew, like, guys, if you can't be letting a Republican do this to you, how do you argue when a Democrat wants to do it? And so it was astonishing from that perspective.
Well, and I think that I'm not trying to make excuses for him, okay, because I agree with you 100% in everything you said, and I think he did the wrong thing. But I think under his perspective, he was like, all right, there's only 6 months until the election's over. Like, I'm going to be able to fix everything in the next 4 years. They won't be able to push me around. Because I honestly believe, and maybe I'm just being naive here, and like I said, I'm not at like 100%. I'm not like a Trumper. I voted for Trump, but I'm not a Trumper, per se. But I do think that honestly, had he been inaugurated on January 20th, that we'd be in a different America right now than we are. I think he would have reversed a lot of those things. That's not an excuse. I don't think he should have allowed it to happen in the first place. But I think he was playing the long game, and he's like, listen, I need to make some concessions now in order to win the general. And it just didn't play out.
Right. But see this, and let's just say that's right. That's the problem, is that if you are a conservative, you have to say it does not matter who's in office. We believe this. We believe the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Third. We believe them all. So Trump, you are wrong. We will not vote for you. We will abandon. Like, that's the only way you're going to conserve anything. is when the chips are down.
Did you see what Mitch McConnell said yesterday?
Oh, about getting the vaccine?
Yeah, he's like, get the vaccine and we're going to be back where we were, last fall. And I was like, what the hell kind of Republican are you, man? Like, he's like, and I tweeted something like, hey, there's only one party now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just that kind of thing. That's why I think the Republicans have totally abandoned the constituents, because the middle class has shrunk so much in this nation that the only two ways to really get elected are big donors and programs for the poor. Right? Because there's like not this middle class base anymore to go after. And I think that we've seen the Republican Party every cycle just shy further and further away from representing working class Americans and advocating and just kind of seeking the big donors and sort of the naivete of the more principled voter base. Like, they're just taking for granted that they're going to get the same amount of money from the evangelical base that they've always gotten, or the same amount of money from the big donors that they've always gotten. And it's a big problem, man. I made a video yesterday. I don't know if you saw it or not, but I was looking on the RNC versus the DNC website. Oh man, like they're only hiring 6 people. Like, one of them's an intern. And I'm like obviously they don't care. They're just coasting. And so I don't know. I'm just disappointed. I hope that a third party comes out of this that represents the working class. But I just hope that it doesn't look like the German Workers' Party looked when it comes.
Well, so you hit on something earlier, which was, and I think the progressives, just to take them, and I'll just make a blanket statement more than anything else. There are a lot of things that progressives say that if you boil it down to the smallest possible inference, they're right. And to your point about they touch on the emotion, but homelessness.
So can you give me an example, like what you mean? Just so I'm on the
same page.
Okay.
So let's talk about let's say maybe systemic racism. Okay. So now I don't think, to be clear, that at the top of the White House and Congress, they're like, how do we implement policies that are racist across the nation? Okay. I don't think that. I do think the war on drugs disproportionately impacts inner city communities, which are mainly African American or Latino or whatever. So from that standpoint, there is something systemic about going on there, and it does impact one particular or a couple different particular minorities more than others. Is that racism or not? Okay, we can have that debate, but there is a policy that overwhelmingly targets those people. And so instead of saying, well, systemic racism doesn't happen, it's like, well, okay, well, hold on. What is it that you mean? Now, if you listen to the AOCs of the world, you're going to get nonsense. But if you listen to community leaders, they'll reference the war on drugs.
Right.
That's a great opportunity to say, well, okay, I'm not sure I agree with the label here, but the policy you're talking about is ruining families, and it has ruined families since its implementation, and we need to do something with that. And so conservatives they just want to push back on the phrase systemic racism, and I understand kind of why they want to do that, but not listen to why everyone uses that label. And I don't know what all the different connotations mean, but there are some times where people, especially community leaders, when you hear them talk, they're referring to the war on drugs, and it's like, okay, that does target people in inner cities who are poor, who are selling drugs. Now, maybe you agree with the policy, maybe you don't, but I think in that context, you at least have to have a conversation going, okay, now AOC, who's out here going to say it, for every thing that goes wrong, I think that's a different talking point to handle altogether. But there are policies like that I would say that disproportionately impact people that conservatives have to figure out how they want to deal with. Do they want the war on drugs to continue? It expands the government. You're locking people up. You talk about middle class separation. Well, you're doing that. You're keeping people poor. The conservatives don't really have a good answer for that. The progressives seem to use that as a tool to beat the Republicans over their head with. So I'm not sure the establishment Democrats want to legalize drugs either, to be clear with you. But that'd be one. Let me think. That's here. Let's talk about minimum wage. Let's talk about maybe immigration. Okay. So during the Democratic primaries, and I'll be quite honest with you, I don't have a very firm immigration policy. So I kind of go back and forth on where I'm at. The Democrats are pretty much open border, right? Well, the Republicans are like building a wall. It's like, well, okay, when you're building a wall, I understand why. But you're also keeping me in the country. Like if I want to leave, the wall works both ways. That's how walls work. They're not one-way walls. So you're keeping me in, which is kind of a troublesome thing. On top of that, you're taking people's property. to build the wall, which I'm not sure that's really a precedent we want to set, to build a wall, we take property. On top of that,
You mean like eminent domain in order
yes,
to actually put the wall on? Okay.
yeah.
Or do you mean income tax in order to pay for the wall?
Well, yeah, they're going to put
policy.
money regardless. We can talk about that. Yeah. Yes,
Right.
And so it's like, well, what is our policy towards people crossing the border, the southern border? Do we want them to come in and maybe have a migrant working class where they can come in, they can work? What is it that we're actually wanting? Because one side's saying everyone should come in, and you're saying build a wall. It's like, well,
here's what it boils down to, man.
Hmm?
It used, in my opinion, okay, so it used to be out of a concern that immigrants would take jobs from Native Americans, and I don't mean like Indian Native Americans. I mean people who are born in America, like born in America citizens. That used to be the concern, and then I think we just generally realized that, for better or worse, this sounds obtuse, but it's not. White Americans don't do the jobs that Mexicans do, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, when was the last time you saw a white guy on a construction site, landscaping, or cleaning a house? Like almost never, right? And so that concern kind of went away. And I think the big issue now that like no one really frames it succinctly, it's about importing votes. So the Republicans are against immigration because they know that the immigrants are going to vote for Democrats, and the Democrats are pro-immigration because they know that the immigrants are going to vote for Democrats. Like, it's as simple as that. It has nothing to do with economics or jobs being taken or human rights issues, because I guarantee you there's no damn way that AOC actually cares about kids being separated from their parents at the border. There's no way that she actually cares about that. She just knows that the more immigrants that come over the border, the more Democrat votes they're going to get. Like, that's what this is actually about. It's not about caring about anyone or protecting anyone's rights. It's only about whether or not you're importing a net gain or a net loss on your voter base. That's all anyone cares about. And so we have to ask ourselves as a nation in an unbiased way, okay? Do we agree that it's okay to import votes for one party or another?
Well, right. So that's what I was saying about the migrant working class, which was people who come to work and not have all the rights of a normal citizen.
I see. Yeah.
I'm not saying that's the solution. I'm saying that's a policy proposal that you could make and the Republicans could make, because I mean, listen, the Democrats aren't begging for people from Cuba to come into the Florida because of exactly what you said. They don't want they don't want the Cubans to come in because the Cubans vote Republican. So I think we agree there. The problem is the optics is build a wall versus separating kids from children from the parents. And so you play this optic game, and the Republicans, they're not good at saying, well, listen, we want them to come in, and here's options to bring them into the country that are because a lot of people, I don't think, necessarily want to come in and stay either. They want to come, go back and forth, go back to their home, make a little money.
They're just trying to send money back to their family.
Right. So the voting thing is not necessarily on their mind. It's on, as you said, the politician's mind. But so it's like, well, surely there's a policy compromise in there somewhere that would work out, that would allow them to come here to work. And in 2021, you can't have these discussions because everything you say is racist or xenophobic or whatever. But if you go look at immigration policies, like in China or some other countries, like it's ours is pretty good comparatively speaking. So I think we have a long way to go before we're anywhere near problematic. But yeah, so those would be a couple of things off the top of my head that I would just say that the Republicans, the conservatives, whatever.
Well, and I don't think it should be so hard to legally immigrate here. So I'm totally opposed to people, coming across the border, and if they get away with it for a long enough period of time, maybe they just get totally forgiven and just get granted citizenship, which is kind of like what the Dems want to do, right? Let's just make them all citizens, right? I'm opposed to that, but I also think it's kind of silly that it takes some people 10 years to become a citizen, right? Like, there was a time in the United States, and obviously times are different now, and we used to have a very, very empty nation, right, during the Western expansion and everything. But there was a time when you got on a boat, you hopped, you signed in at Ellis Island, and then you're basically a hop, skip, and a jump away from voting, being a citizen, right? Yeah. And that's how our ancestors got here. My ancestors came over here in 1893 on my dad's side, right, from Switzerland, and they got on the boat, then they came over at Ellis Island, and they moved to Philadelphia or Pennsylvania. I think they were part of the Pennsylvania Dutch. I don't even know the history very well, but my point is, like, it should it should be hard enough to stop people from taking advantage of the system to immigrate here, but it should be easy enough that like any reasonable person, that's going to contribute to society even in the smallest way can do it, And so I don't know what the solution is. I'm not smart enough, or I'm probably smart enough, but I'm certainly not knowledgeable enough to
the
make those
libertarian
calls.
suggestion would be to get rid of the welfare state first, see, because that is a concern that I know that some people have, which is they come, some immigrants will come and be a tax on the system, and what percentage that is, I don't know. If you enter the war on drugs, I think you kind of start putting some of the fear of the violent people coming across. That kind of goes away to some degree. Beyond that, it's a very complicated problem on some level because you are, to your point about how hard should it be. I don't know. I go back and forth on that as well because if I were going to move to, let's just pick China because it's a very different culture. If I were going to move to China, should I be forced to learn certain things about Chinese culture before I could become a citizen there? Now you can't become a citizen there, but should I?
Yeah, you should.
Right. And so it's like, well, how hard or easy do you make it? That's and how much of the culture do you have to at least have? Those are questions that.
Even a simple policy like, all right, you can have citizenship if you can pass an advanced English exam. I don't want to sound like Jim Crow, but like I would make that compromise. I was like, listen, if you're an illegal immigrant in the United States and you can actually have a conversation that makes sense at above an 8th grade level in English, then you can become a citizen. Like I don't think that's the right answer, but holy cow, is that like a leap forward? You know what I mean? Because a lot of our problems are we have a lot of kids, as a result of this illegal immigration, we have a lot of kids who are American citizens because they're born here to illegal parents that are speaking English as a second language, and then they struggle in school, right? Especially in inner city areas and stuff. And so, like, even that small adjustment would have a drastic long-term positive impact on immigration policy and the effects.
Yes, you're saying just kind of cut all the red tape and just boil it down to this one simple hurdle. Which is learn English at a middle school level or whatever it is, and then everything else kind of to the side. If you can do that, you're good.
Yeah, and that's just me shooting from the hip, right?
Yeah,
so like one day, this clip's going to come out, and everyone's going to be like, Chase is an idiot because X, Y, Z, and they'll be right. Okay, but it's just shoot from the hip. Like, why aren't we just thinking about creative ways to address these issues?
and that's we had a lady on who's writing a book on the border. We had a good conversation, and this is what I said that podcast thing here is that it's so disheartening today because no matter what you say, if you say the wrong thing, man, you are labeled either some open borders liberal or some xenophobe, and you're this is just, it's not a okay. You can make it a very simple issue. Okay, open borders or closed borders. Like you can make it very simple, which is the two extremes. But anytime you start getting that gray area, there's just trade-offs. There are just trade-offs, and how you rank those trade-offs is hard to conceptualize. A, and then B, can you think through all the implications of the trade-offs? And you start getting through that. It's like, and then you take yourself and you put yourself like in a different context. Like I said, moving to China, it's like, well, what should be the requirements if you just reverse the roles? And then you think about the fact that you've got people in abject poverty in Central America who are starving to death and how desperate they are to get here. And, the last thing that I want to do is keep them in poverty because we've got some crazy rules. So yeah,
Did you ever see the Gumball video about immigration?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The TikTok,
so basically the gist is there's no way that we can immigrate. We can immigrate away poverty, right? And
right.
Because when you see it visualized like that, you're like, holy cow, we can't import everyone that makes less than $1 a day because there's just not enough square footage in this nation, right? And so ultimately, like even if we have the most compassionate, empathetic approach, which is basically what the Democrats espouse, that approach, even though I would say that they do it for their own selfish purposes, right? Like we discussed earlier, to get votes. But even if we actually feel that way, right? The solution is still not to just allow them to come here. And I don't know what the solution is, but you have to solve the problem there. Like, think about all these countries, man, that have like an astronomical amount of natural resources. Like just the sheer amount of geography in Russia alone or China alone, right? Like there's fresh water, there are precious metals, there's all sorts of natural resources that are astounding in these areas, yet they still see poverty, and it's because they don't have systems that protect private property rights. Like that's, in my opinion, that's the reason that America's been successful, is because you can invest in something with the expectation that the mob isn't going to steal it from you.
Well, now you can.
Or you could,
Or that's a little, but yes, now you can. So our listeners, go back to episode 33. We did have on the lady about the immigration stuff, so you can kind of hear her perspective on it as well, if you want to kind of a more broader on that. But to your point, you cannot import to fix the immigration problems. Agreed. The second thing I would say is that, you talk about Honduras, Nicaragua, the countries I was thinking of specifically right in there. You look at the poverty and you just go, if you go there and you walk away thinking, I would ever expect someone to live in that, that's the hard part. No, you can't import to fix it. I agree. Which means that their governments had to be held accountable as well for all the corruption and all what you're alluding to. You had to hold their governments accountable as well. It's a very multi-pronged process that I agree that it's tons of issues involved. Unfortunately, it's no easy.
Right. And the challenge with that is if you start trying to think of ways that we can solve those problems, then you very quickly move away from like America First principles, because you start thinking about like, okay, is there foreign aid, or do we send in like consultants, or because as human beings we want to solve problems. We think like that, and ultimately the question is, it's kind of like being on the lifeboat on the Titanic. Like, sort of, you're glad you're there, but you're also an asshole because somebody else is drowning because of you, And
Right.
I feel like the United States is sort of in that position where it's like, man, things are great here relatively. It is a lifeboat, so it kind of sucks, but things are great here, and we want to try to get as many people in the lifeboats as possible. But we're worried that if we go back too soon, that the boats will get swarmed, right? Which was a real concern that they had on the lifeboats. And so ultimately the problem is there's just not enough boats for everybody to survive the shipwreck that is international geopolitical climate.
So when you say America First, you unpack that for me. Kind of, what all does that bring to mind from your perspective?
To me, the number one thing that comes to mind is foreign aid. Like when they passed the COVID relief bill, and a vast amount of it just was foreign aid. It's just stuff like that. So when I think of America First, I think, okay, so we have American citizens, and then we have leaders that are elected by American citizens, and then those elected leaders pass laws or pass tax laws. So the government is funded through tax by citizens, and then the government gives that money or spends it like internationally. Or provides aid internationally when we have plenty of domestic problems that need funding or resources or programs, right? And so it's just a very simple. It just seems like sort of a scam to not be America First from a leadership perspective, because it's like, why are you giving X number of $1 billion to Turkey or like some random country? And it's like, what political incentive does a politician have to vote to provide aid to a third country? Like these politicians don't do things out of the kindness of their heart. Nobody does things out of the kindness of their own heart. That's why capitalism works, because it brings the most good out of selfishness as any other system, right? Like Milton Friedman classically said, do you think people aren't greedy in Russia? Do you think people aren't greedy in communism? People are greedy everywhere. That's the deal. The only difference is capitalism actually creates some sort of good out of that greed, right? Like the reason that everybody can afford to have a car is because Ford wanted to make as much money as possible, so he thought up the assembly line, or at least used it. I don't know if he thought it up. A lot of those guys stole ideas. But the point I'm trying to make is America First to me is doing what's best for Americans before doing what's best for the world.
Okay, so then so I hear that, but I don't know how you implement that. So, for instance, when you could argue that, going back to your point about the immigrants, we'll be doing what's best for America, which would be abolishing the minimum wage, and allowing low-income workers to come in, which would be the best for Americans, which would be counterintuitive by the perspective, though. So,
yes,
right.
And I think I agree with you on those points, but I haven't thought through it thoroughly enough to comfortably say that.
Yeah,
but probably.
So I would say, like, just your foreign policy spending. Okay, agreed. We waste a bunch of money in the Fed. Like that would be the solution there.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt that the Fed sucks. Come on, man.
That's like, okay. If America First means in the Fed, I'm in. Okay.
Yeah, definitely, dude. There's no greater sin. You want to talk about racist policies? Inflation is the number one racist policy ever because it disproportionately impacts minorities more than any other policy. It's a poor tax, right? Like if you look at the black community in the United States, like pre-abandonment of the gold standard, they were modest. They were getting by modestly, but they were getting by. Like you think like nuclear family, parents are married, Christian values. I mean, you look at the protests alone from the civil rights movement in the '60s, and they're all wearing suits. I mean, they're getting hosed down by firemen and they're wearing suits, And then you look at the protests today and it's like, who the hell are these guys? Like, it's like the way they're dressed, the way they carry themselves. And my point is, when inflation hit, as soon as inflation hit, that's when you started seeing those communities turn into hell. And it was because, in my opinion, communities that were barely getting by before inflation, when the value of the dollar declined by 10%, that put them over that threshold. So now instead of working one job, you've got to work two, so your kids never see you, right? Or maybe, and then your kids never see you, so maybe they get involved with the wrong crowd, or they turn to crime, or they dabble with drugs. Like this, I'm against the drug war. I think it's a huge problem, and I don't think it was designed to disproportionately affect minority communities, though I think that's what happened. But I'm totally against the drug war. But I don't think the drug war would have been a problem if those communities weren't just so broke.
Well, okay, so yeah, you get into there's a
yeah, it's a can of worms. Sorry, man.
No. It's not. It's just there's a lot of tangents there. When I'm talking about the war on drugs and kind of the impact on communities, I try to keep it somewhat simple because what's going on in Miami is different than Detroit and all this stuff.
Right.
There's a lot of factors involved. So the simplest way that I deduce the war on drugs impact on the family is Bob is 19. And he goes down and gets little Tommy, who's 13, to sling whatever he's doing, because he knows that little Tommy will go to juvie. Okay, so little Tommy goes to juvie a couple times, and then by the time he becomes 18, he is kind of a hardened criminal already. And then boom, he gets busted in the real court. He can't get a job, doesn't go to college. He's been missing school. So all of us, and so you kind of compound the problems. Through the war on drugs there, you've had many encounters with the police, so your view of the police is bad. We can talk about the police in a second, but your general disposition towards them is not positive. And so then you've kind of deconstructed the family by putting capitalist, which let's be honest, is capitalist is what it is. It's just capitalist market. It's the drug market. You put that,
sure.
But the problem is you put the worst of capitalism on display, which is the black market, right? Because the black market, that's the worst of capitalism. And so because there are no rules, the rules are what you determine them to be, because you can't get protection from the state. And so, you take that into these inner cities and it just wrecks shop on them. And then of course if you listen to kind of some of the counties and whatnot, talk about the funding that they get for the war on drugs, it's unbelievable how much money they get. So anyways, so that's kind of the impact on the local communities there, was what I'd say. Inflation obviously exacerbates that. There's other policies that come out that exacerbate that as well. So there's a confluence of events, I think, that impact them. Inflation is definitely one of them. If you get rid of the war on drugs, would it fix all the problems? No. If you get rid of inflation, fix all the problems? No. It's not a singular issue, but
it might, man. It might. If you fixed inflation, that you'd see a lot of changes. I don't know if it would fix all. I would obviously know one thing is going to fix every problem, but if you were able to stop inflation, and I don't mean deflation, because deflation is a problem too, but if you were able to stop inflation at least at the rate that it's happening, and I think it's underestimated or underreported for various incentives.
It's definitely
if you were to stop that, I think that you would see incredible positive outcomes over the course of a generation.
I think so, but I think the libertarians, I'll pick on libertarians here for a minute. I think the libertarians had to be careful that, the world is not just dollars and cents. There's morality, there's all these other things that are attached to the world, community. And so, you can see people who thrive in economic poverty because they have other things outside of the dollars and cents. So I'm not entirely sure that those issues are strictly dollars and cents. So inflation would help, definitely. But I'm not 100% sure that fix all the problems.
Can we at least start there?
Let's start with the end of the war on drugs.
Yeah, either one. That's fine. We have like ending the Fed that's a hell of a good step.
So, okay, in all honesty, I'm gonna get bad libertarian here. I would not end the Fed tomorrow if I could. I would not.
Oh no! You got to do that very carefully.
Right.
It's like taking apart a time bomb, man. You got to know what wire to cut when. Otherwise, the whole thing's gonna blow.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I'm with you on that,
exactly.
man. Totally with you on that.
Yeah. I'm not wanting to conserve. I'm not wanting to conserve it, but it's just slowly. Yeah, it's a good way to think about it. It's a bomb. You got to take it apart, kind of piece by piece, because if you ended the Fed tomorrow, the economic fallout would be.
It'd be awesome, though.
Well,
like anybody with ammunition would immediately become the equivalent of a millionaire.
Yeah. Well, where you're at in the world and where I'm at in the world, I don't know. I'm kind of out here in the country. The purge won't get me for a long time.
Oh, if the crap hits the fan, I'm coming right up to you, man. We're hanging out. We're moving in. I'm gonna bring my baby and my wife and my dog.
Well, I've got 4 kids of my own and a wife and a dog, so we'll be crowded. But come on.
Oh yeah. I'll bring my ammo. We'll be cool.
There we go. Okay, so I know we're getting close to the end here, so let's talk about looking ahead. So
okay,
we're almost in August now, right? Which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
The midterms will start.
Excuse me.
Kind of the race for the midterms start here in just a few months. People kind of jockeying for position, ready to roll. What's your outlook for 2022? Do you think the Republicans take back the House, maybe the Senate, or will the Dems hold on?
If you were to ask me that the day before yesterday, I would have said there's no doubt in my mind that we were going to take the House and the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
But after I looked at the 6 roles that the RNC is hiring for yesterday, I think we.
You have no hope.
No. I mean, seriously, the RNC is hiring for the same roles and in the same number of open positions as like the Wendy's down the street from my house.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I watched that video. We had to find on Twitter. It's like a 2-minute video. You got to go through the positions, and it's like, ooh, you got an election going up.
Yeah, the whole video is 12 minutes. I did the whole rant on YouTube, and I lost it a little bit. I'm not usually an angry person, but I just couldn't believe it because I mean, all this stuff that's happened in the past year is just so outrageous in terms of like liberties being violated, very questionable elections. Like regardless of whether or not the election was a fraud, like you still have to admit it's a major problem that half the country thinks it is. And it's not because they're all stupid. It's because there's reason to doubt because nobody trusts any of the systems in place anymore, right? Because nobody trusts the media, nobody trusts the government, and so there's all this crazy stuff going on, all this economic, political, criminal turmoil going on, and the RNC is hiring 6 positions, one of them an intern.
Well,
come on.
It's funny to hear you say that because I was on this panel the other day, and I was bringing up. The other panelist was from the Appalachian Mountains, close to where a lot of the opioid stuff originally started, and he was talking about just kind of the impact locally. And I said this for perspective to the people. It was a closed event, so I can't say the names. But anyways, I was like, hey, for perspective, down here in Texas, this is how this looks because we're talking about the role of media. I hear opioid breakout is terrible. People are dying. Big Pharma's the worst. Prescription drugs. Okay, that's what I hear. Then COVID-19 comes out, and it's get your shot, get your shot, get your shot. Big Pharma's great. They saved us. The media never once stopped to tell me when Big Pharma stopped being bad to when they start being good. Now, I'm not trying to take a stance on whether you should get a vaccine or not. I'm simply saying when you go to the Trump years, you have years of the election was fraudulent, the Russians meddled, all this stuff, and then Trump loses, and then people don't trust the election, and the media's like, "Well, how can you not trust?" It's like, guys, do y'all not read? Do you not read what you put out? And this is just if you're a Martian landing on the and you're just observing here. Surely you could see that you tell people for years not to trust Big Pharma, not to trust the elections, and then all of a sudden you say trust the elections, trust Big Pharma, and then you're mad at those same people for never explaining how maybe you overtold this one story back here, or maybe you were right, but you changed your opinion on Big Pharma or elections. You never stop and just say, hey, this is what we're saying. This is what we're saying now. These two things look to be in opposition. this is why we want to synthesize them for you, because we can understand how you, person who doesn't follow the news like we do, might be confused. To me, that's the biggest frustration of all right now, of all the media stuff that we're living in, is that the media, they continue to go from narrative to narrative and never stop and explain the difference between what they're saying 6 months ago or 2 years ago to what they're saying now, and why that might cause tension in the country.
Yeah, well, and I think it just goes to show that their job isn't to report the news anymore; it's to prop up the political narratives, right? And there's a number of reasons for this, some of which are clearer than others. But, part of it has to do with the conglomeration of media. I mean, if you look at the chart of the number of like corporate media outlets from 50 years ago versus now, there was a few media outlets, then there were many, and then those many got consolidated and acquired, and now there's a conglomeration. And so what we're seeing today is not a whole lot of independent journalism going on, where people are actually trying to discover what's true. It's a lot of peddling and pandering, and some of it has to do with the click economy in terms of just reporting whatever can get the most clicks. But they have no concern for any sort of consistency or logic, because they're not in the business of being true or convincing of the truth. They are in the business of driving as much reliable traffic as possible for ad revenue. And we're seeing how that manifests in the market, and that's why we see so much hypocrisy. So, the only cure to it, in my opinion, is for the people to realize it and just not participate. I mean, almost like a boycott. Like I don't click on links I don't click on headlines that piss me off. Like if I see a headline and I'm immediately frustrated, I won't click on it, because I know that they made money if I click on it. So
Right.
You just have to, as a consumer, you have to make some ethical choices, I think.
Yeah, that, and excuse me, I think we have to get to a point where we realize that every opinion is not just the end of the world. You can have different opinions, and we have to okay, the political elites, I don't care. You can say everyone about those people. Like, I have no problem with that. So, Cruz, AOC, Biden, Trump, feel free to go after those people as much as you want. I really don't care. But the person to person level, you have to just be able to talk to people and hear what they're saying, what they want, and not just assume the worst motivations of people. And that's, to me, where we've really lost it. And I think Trump plays probably a bigger role here than maybe someone to admit, which is, he was so good at coming in and kind of give people names, and people would laugh at him, and he was really funny.
Rocket Man.
Yeah, right, Little Rocket Man. And so it's like, oh, that's so funny. Most people aren't as good at it as he is, but they'll do
Sleepy
it.
Joe.
Yeah, Sleepy Joe. But then now you'll see that the people were trying to do what he did, and they're not as good at it as he was.
Right.
Whether he was supposed to be doing it or not, this is aside. He was actually kind of halfway good at it. Most people aren't as good at it, and so now we've got to relabel everyone and try to give them a name or whatever. And it's just like, I was reading the Bulwark the other day, and they were calling Roy Gold, the congressman in Texas. I can't remember. They called him something goldfish. It's like, yeah, that's not funny. Like, that's just like, y'all are stupid.
Were they attacking his memory? If they were attacking his memory, then it's kind of funny, because goldfish have a 3-second memory.
No, that was his memory, but it's just, it was something. But even when you read the piece,
it's got to be good. Like, it's like offensive jokes, right? Like, people are always worried about like comedians getting canceled and stuff for making an inappropriate joke. And it's like, my theory on it is, listen, the more offensive a joke is, the funnier it has to be. Like, if it's funny, then let it roll. But you can't just make a Holocaust joke that, it better be hilarious.
You're stepping out. I won't be making. I'm not that funny. I won't be making any jokes. So
I'm not funny enough to make a Holocaust joke, but somebody might be. I'm gonna have to reset my camera real quick. Sorry, it froze.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm still here. I can still hear you and everything.
Yeah.
Reset.
No, it's fine. So I will leave the Holocaust jokes to people who are far more. Professional comedians can
come on, Ryan, try one.
No. I'll get enough trouble on my own as it is. So okay, fine. So that's a good way to wrap it up. Feels like it's time now. So okay, tell people again. Your Twitter handle is at
Real Chase Geiser. REALCHASEGEISER. And the podcast is One American Podcast with an N on the end of America. So not to be confused with One American News Network, it's One American Podcast.
I was wondering about that. I was wondering.
Yeah.
I thought I saw that on there. Okay.
And the way I came up with the name of it was, when people ask me if I'm a Republican or a Democrat, I just like to say I am one American. And so, because I don't like to be associated with groups. Maybe it's the libertarian deep in my soul, but that's One American Podcast is what it is.
All right. And that's on all the way. I know it's on YouTube. It's actually a podcast as well. Audio.
Yep, everywhere you can find it. Yep. I do more content on my YouTube than I publish on audio. Like sometimes I'll do quick live streams and stuff that I won't put out as an official episode. So if you want to catch all my content, follow me on YouTube. But if you just want to hear the main episodes in full, then Spotify, anywhere, Apple, Google, it's all there.
Okay. All right, listeners, and thank you for that, Chase, for coming on. And we have Paul Sullivan coming on next, so we'll get that out. What's today? Today's Wednesday, so we'll get that out by the end of the week, and we'll talk to you then.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great to be on the show.